In this video, I'm going to show you my recipe for painting rich gold. Hi everyone, and welcome to another Brushstroke painting guide. I'm Brushstroke, and as you heard from the intro there, this video is a recipe guide on how to paint rich gold. Now, gold is one of those colours that can be painted in lots of different ways, so I will be showing you quite a few different recipes really on how I paint golds. But this particular one is for when you want to do that really sumptuous, luxurious, rich looking gold. And you can use it in so many different places, even if it's just a little accent on your buccaneer or full-on gold armour for your dwarven warrior, for your Dungeons and Dragons gold horde, or even accents on your sci-fi armour. This gold recipe is for when you want that gold to really pop. Now for this video I'm going to be using a Necron model as an example model to paint it on, but as I say, this is a recipe to use for anywhere you want to use a rich gold. Now before we begin, I think there's a few things I should mention which will help you get the most out of this video, starting off with thinning your paints. So this recipe relies quite heavily on getting that nice clean smooth finish. So if you'd like to know more about how I thin my paints and how thin is thin, then you might want to check out the paint thinning video I did by clicking the link above. I also get asked a lot about the paintbrushes I use. Now, thanks to the awesome guys at Artis Opus, I now actually have a paintbrush set, which has brushes in it which are specifically picked to match the brushes that I use in all of my paint guides. So if you'd like more details on that, then please do click this link above. And then finally, this video recipe does rely heavily on some edge highlighting. So if you'd like some tips and tricks on how to improve your edge highlighting, then please do click that link above or check out all the links in the description below. Okay then, so let's make a start on some painting. And the first thing you're going to notice is I've already primed my miniature piece. And for this, I've just used some Vallejo surface primer in black, and then I've added a light grey zenithal highlight from about 45 degrees above, just to pick out those details on camera. Now this zenithal highlight is not necessary for this recipe, it's just something that I do for my videos. So if you prefer, you could just do an all over prime of a medium grey or black and the recipe would still work fine. Because the first step is going to be applying an all-over base coat colour, and for this I'm going to use some Retributor armour from Games Workshop. So really simple step just to start off with. I've thinned the paint with a little bit of water on my palette, and the aim of this step is to get a nice clean and smooth coverage across all of the surface. Because I've thinned it down, it does make it a little bit more transparent, so I will need to apply several coats in order to build up to a solid finish. Now you might hear some negative things about Games Workshop and their metallic paints, but they've really upped their game in recent years, and this one in particular is very, very good. It covers well, it has a rich, smooth feel to it, it has a high metallic fleck, and it goes on beautifully smooth. Now for this step, I'm not being particularly neat, but I am being concerned about making sure the paint goes on cleanly and smoothly. It's particularly important when you're painting with metallic paints that you do this, because it's far better to apply multiple thin layers and make sure that those metallic flecks in the paint are evenly distributed across the whole of the surface, than to try and rush it and apply it too thickly, and you'll get heavy concentrations of those metallic flecks and the paint will just all clump up and look really ugly. So do take your time, make sure the paint is thinned on your palette, and apply it as multiple layers to build up to a solid finish. Now in this particular case, it only took a couple of layers. Now if you do have the luxury of having an airbrush, then I would highly recommend that you do this step with your airbrush. Again, I'd apply it as several thin layers just to make sure you get that even coverage of the metallic fleck across the whole of the surface, and you build up to that rich solid finish. Now whichever method you use, when you finish you should have something that looks a little bit like this. Nice and shiny and super smooth and ready for that next step. And it's at this point I'm going to paint in all the other colours on the model, so I'm going to do that now, which means we can move on to the next stage, which is going to be applying a wash all over the gold details, and for this I'm going to use some Seraphim Sepia from Games Workshop. So another nice and simple step to follow on with then, I'm going to use this neat straight from the bottle. I'm going to step up to a large brush so I can get this done nice and quickly. Now that's not to mean that I can just throw this on and let it flood the model. Actually what I'm going to do is try and add it a little bit more methodically and encourage it to settle into all those recesses and all those grooves, fill in that detail and really add that shadow. But on any of the flatter areas I'm going to encourage it away from the center and push it towards the edges to try and get a nice smooth transition on all these curves and shapes. Now in this recipe I'm using Seraphim Sepia because I want it to give a nice warm rich feel to the metal, but you can actually use different coloured shades to shade your gold. For example, purple is a very popular option. It gives a more colder aged look. You could go for a flesh shade, which again will give a warm tint to it but not quite as rich. You could go for a blue and go for a really cold aged look to your gold as well. So definitely do play around with some different colours and see what different results you can get. And the only other thing to remember when using a wash is that it will take a little bit longer to dry, so do make sure it is fully dry before moving on to the next stage. And with that wash now fully dry, you'll find that it's added a real depth to the gold, which is more than good enough for a tabletop standard if you wanted to stop here. But if you do want to push on to the next level, we're going to add a lot of that shine back to the gold, and for this I'm going to use some gold from Vallejo. So the aim of this step really is to add that little bit more volume and definition to the metal. So what I'm doing is I'm painting in all of the raised areas and I'm making those a lot lighter, and I'm leaving untouched any areas which would be in shadow or in the recesses and in the gaps. And what this does, like I say, is it just adds that little bit more volume to the metal and gives it a bit more shape. So what I've done is I've just thinned my gold down on my palette with that little bit of water so it flows cleanly and smoothly. And I'm actually just going to apply a single layer to this. It's all about adding that little bit more shine and highlight to the areas which would catch the most light. And then on the underside of things and in the recesses, I'm just going to leave that shade wash untouched. So for example, on the forearm here, it obviously curves round. So I'm going to paint the top area, which we're catching the light, but then just paint it down to the sides to the point where it starts to curve back in and it will go back into shadow, and I'm going to leave that untouched. And then it's just a case of working your way around the model, painting in those higher surfaces and leaving our shade wash on the underside and in all the recesses. Okay, so with that highlight layer now added, it's really brought that shine back to the gold. And now there's only really one extra step left to do, and that's add an edge highlight to all of the gold. And for this, I'm going to use some chrome from Vallejo. Absolutely fantastic paint this. If you've never used it before, I highly recommend that you get some of this right away. It's fantastic for edge highlighting any metals at all. You use it straight from the pot, so no need to thin, and it is almost like liquid metal. It's absolutely fantastic. In fact, it's so bright under my lights, even the camera's not really picking it up. But what you want to do for this stage is work your way around all the gold areas, picking out those sharp edges with your edge of your brush to give it that extra definition and highlight. So depending on the model you're painting, this could be quite a time-consuming step, but it is worth doing well and it is worth doing neatly, so do take your time and try not to rush. As always, if you do make any mistakes, don't panic, just let it dry, and you can always go back and neaten things back up again later with some Vallejo gold. So like I say, it's just a case of slowly working your way around all of the model and picking out all of those edges. And after a while, I actually find it gets quite relaxing. You sort of get into a bit of a rhythm and you can hit those edges with that sweet part of the brush just on the tip. But like I said at the start of this video, if you do want some hints and tips in terms of how I improved my edge highlighting, then please do check out this video above because I think it will help you a lot. Okay, so with those edge highlights now added, the gold recipe is complete. So all I need to do now is just finish off the rest of the model, and that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you found it useful. And of course, a massive thank you to my channel members whose names are going across the screen now. Your support for the channel is very much appreciated. If you did enjoy this video, then please do hit that like button and drop a comment below. If you'd like to see more of these recipe videos, then please let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see. Also, don't forget to check out the description below where I'm going to list all of the paints that I've used for this recipe and where you can get those at discount prices, so it's definitely worth checking out. And you'll also find all the links to the videos I mentioned earlier too. If you have enjoyed this video, then please do hit that subscribe button and don't forget to click the notification bell to be told whenever I post another video. Speaking of other videos, I'd love it if you stayed on the channel, so why not stay and check out another recipe video or perhaps one of my other painting videos where you can see these recipes in action.